And welcome for Manchester United versus Wolves. Obviously, we were just about able to scrape the 3 points, but aside from Mason Greenwood's brilliant finish there to score that goal, we were really, really poor throughout. And once again, it's the same problems we've seen so many times under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Obviously, the positives, we start off with the unbeaten away record. It is now the longest unbeaten record away from home in Premier League history. How we've done that with a side as inconsistent as this, I've got no idea. Last season, every time we went down away from home, we'd activate Comeback FC, get in at half-time at 1-0 down or whatever else the scoreline happened to be by that point, and somehow come out in the second half a completely different team. But now with away fans back in stadiums, we can't afford to be doing that. And thankfully this time, we somehow didn't go into half-time 1-0 down. But many of the same issues that we had before did persist. So Wolves set up in a 3-4-3, as we've seen with a lot of teams in recent times. Most notable will be Chelsea. They set up in 3-4-3 as well. Quite similar to the way Wolves did. And they caused us a lot of problems. And again, though, the same problem that we've always seemed to have with playing out from the back was existing. Against Southampton, we tried a different structure because they played in a different way. We'll come on to that in a minute. But the main problem was that we just could not get the ball reliably from our defence to our attack. And because of that, we kept losing the ball in the midfield area. It was a really scrappy game. We couldn't control it, couldn't sustain attacks, couldn't retain possession in the Wolves' half. And that meant it was really hard for us to create chances and cause their defence problems. And that made it so easy for them to turn over the ball. And if they turn over the ball in the pivot here, sort of in the Fred Pogba area here, all it takes is one pass from, let's say, it's Neves or Moutinho that turn over that ball. All it takes is one pass and Adama Traore's in, up against Luke Shaw, or if he's gone forward up here, then he's up against Fred. And Traore in a one-on-one is going to beat almost anyone. So it's so easy for Wolves. And that's really where I want to start today with this, is just looking at why it was so easy for Wolves and how in future United can get round it to stop this happening again, because it seems to be something that's happening all the time, constantly, and we cannot afford for it to become a problem all season long. We just cannot afford this to happen. And so let's say we're building the ball out from De Gea here. What normally happens is, obviously, against Southampton there, they were pressing with 2 strikers in their 4-4-2, so we dropped Matic back into a back 3 to try and beat that. This time, we didn't have that same problem because Wolves had a front 3 here, so what we did was we kept the back 4 fairly deep. Wan-Bissaka and Shaw pushed on a little bit, but they didn't go as high as they were against Southampton. So we were playing it around here, and obviously Wolves, where possible, their front 3 were trying to stop those balls into Pogba and Fred, so naturally, the way United dealt with that was trying to get that ball wide to the fullbacks and then back into the pivot. Now, our problem constantly throughout the game was that Pogba and Fred were on the same line. I'm talking about the line here. So from let's talk about this line here, this line across the pitch. Pogba and Fred were on the same line constantly. And what that means is that if you look sure you receive the ball here in this sort of area, they're only one option there, because if you pass that ball in field, you can pass it to Fred, and if he misses it, it goes to Pogba. But really, that's one option, that's one direction you can pass. So all it takes is the pressing player here to drop into that direction, and both those options are shut off at once. So it's so much easier to deal with. What you really want to see is maybe Fred dropping off a little bit there, Pogba coming to there. So Luke Shaw, if the pressing player blocks that option into Fred, he's got that option into Pogba, who can play it first time to Bruno or whatever. Or if they blocks that option to Pogba, Fred is then available. But because they're standing in the same place, basically on that same line, they're essentially useless in terms of playing out from the back, which is really, really unhelpful for United. And it's a problem that we've constantly got with this double pivot. It just does not work. That is a massive, massive issue for us. And then looking forward, you look beyond that. If we can't get the ball into Fred and Pogba, you can't move it to Bruno, you can't move it to Greenwood, you can't move it to Sancho and Dan James. It's really hard for us to get that ball forward. So that, for me, was our biggest problem. If you compare this to Southampton last week, we had a very similar issue. Luke Shaw and Wan-Bissaka would push on there. Let's put Pogba in place of Matic there, and we formed the back 3 there. But against Southampton, it was a similar issue in terms that we struggled to get it into Fred, but obviously it was even worse because Fred was then left there on his own. So when we did get the ball into Fred, he was so easy to press. Now, that's what Southampton did again here. They pressed us when they could as well. So the fullbacks weren't as high up again here against Wolves, but what it meant was that because they were on the same line again, it was so easy. As soon as that ball goes in, for both of those two to squeeze up, knowing that Fred and Pogba, then because they're on the same line, they can push up, knowing that you can't slip a ball in there to bypass them, because Fred will take 2 touches, he can't get the ball under control first time, and they can squeeze us. The whole team, Wolves team, squeezes up, and then, as we said at the start, they win that ball back off Fred, one ball into Adama Traore, we've got problems. So that was a constant problem that we've seen from United ever since Ole Gunnar Solskjaer took over. And for me, that's the biggest difference between United right now and between some of the other teams that are doing a little better in the league, looking a little bit better organised. So they've always got that structure to fall back on. And yes, it means United are more flexible, we're more unpredictable, but when we're not sharp, when we're not at our best, that means it's also much easier to defend against and much, much easier in a lot of cases for opposition players to play, which is a big problem for us. I think other problems we had throughout the game were just we didn't really work Wolves' back three, and a lot of that comes down to the possession. Ultimately, most of that comes down to not being able to keep the ball for long enough. But what we didn't see was we didn't see very often they were actually able to pin Wolves' fullbacks back, their wing-backs back, because, and part of the problem was that Sancho was he was basically non-existent, to be fair, and Dan James was constantly cutting in. What he needed to do, what we needed from him, was that he needed to drive wide around them, stretch that back three out wide, gives Bruno a little bit of space in field, and also it forces the wing-backs then to come a little bit deeper, and that should give us more space in the midfield areas to circulate the ball. The problem was we just didn't see it at all for United. And if you don't keep the ball, if you don't sustain your attacks, you're going to struggle to beat any team, especially one that's as good on counter-attack as Wolves are. And we know going into the game they had, bar Liverpool, the second most shots in the Premier League this season. They can't be far off top now. They had so many in this game, should have scored so many goals. I think their XG was over 2, and United was just about 0.6. We've somehow come away with the win, but there's so many things that United need to see improved. MUFC Daily saying Varane is good and Souness is racist because Pogba is milking it and saying Pogba's trying to break a leg. Sancho will come good. Yeah, Sancho will come good eventually. We hope. I think he's not been the brightest today. He's got to adjust to having way less time than he does in the Bundesliga. But again, if we can't keep the ball and get it to him in reliable situations, then it's more difficult. If you're a winger and you only get the ball sort of once every 15 minutes in a 1v1, you're going to want to take on your man because you know you may not get another chance. Whereas, if we can keep that ball for 10-15 minutes, we know, look at the City wingers, they know if they don't think they can beat their man, they just pass it backwards, fully confident they know they're going to get another chance in 2 minutes. We don't have that yet because we can't keep the ball to the same extent. What we had so often was Bruno and Pogba getting that ball and they just play a long ball over the top because they know that if we pass it forward, we'll end up losing it and they'd have to run back. They just play that long ball straight over the top and, I mean, sometimes it worked, sometimes we kept the ball, but a lot of the times we lost it and we'd concede a counter-attack. It's a real big problem that we can't keep the ball, and that's the main issue, both with the tactics and with the personnel here. Fred's not good enough. We've got to get rid of him. 2 games on the trot, he's been lucky to stay on past half-time, and that's embarrassing for a United player. Ronaldo will help. You reckon? And yeah, Ronaldo will definitely help because they demand higher standards. But if we can't get the ball to him, it's no different. Greenwood's brilliant when we're getting the ball, as Ronaldo will be as well. All out, personally, fair enough. You can't disagree at this point. I don't think anyone in their right mind can disagree with saying that Ole's got to make some significant improvements at the very least. I think saying Ole out this early into the season, when we've not really had a chance to sort of adjust and settle down yet, a little bit harsh, but if this keeps going and we struggle to win games, then I think it's tough for him because we've not seen any improvement in this over 3 seasons now. It is a massive, massive issue. Anything else anyone wants to discuss? Let me know. If we don't sign a defensive mid-play Matic, yeah, I was calling for Nemanja Matic a lot of times then because I think on the ball he's so much better. His progressive passing, moving that ball forwards is so important for us because Fred, he takes 3-4 touches, and also not just taking 3 or 4 touches, also his weight of pass is not good enough individually, and a lot of times as well he doesn't check his shoulders before he receives. So if there's a player, sometimes the midfielders Moutinho and Neves weren't pressing Fred on a couple of occasions. He was receiving that ball from these guys, and actually it was the strikers pressing them. But because Fred's not checked his shoulders before, he turns towards the strikers and is lucky to keep that ball. So there's so many things wrong with Fred's game. Checking his shoulders, and most importantly, his weight of pass is atrocious. He passes that to Sancho. When Pogba gives the ball to Sancho, when he's got time on the ball or to anyone, he makes sure that his pass is not just to the player, but into the player's stride so they can move with it in the direction they want to. Pogba's always thinking a step ahead. He's thinking, where can I get the ball to that player that immediately they can turn and make an impact? Sometimes it means he gets caught in possession, yes, which isn't good, and he's working on that, and he's improved a lot in that in recent seasons. But most of the time, he gets the weight of pass spot on, which is so important. Right, I want to finish the video with a quick recap. Varane and David De Gea saved us, yeah, agreed. Varane was fantastic. David De Gea made a brilliant couple of saves. He was fantastic all game. Hopefully he's back to his best, but we say that a lot. There's a lot of times all season when he makes a brilliant game save, and to be fair with De Gea, we've said a lot of times that when he's got a lot of things to do in a game, a lot of saves to make, he's always sharp, he's accurate. It's when he's only got 1 or 2 things to do, it's weird, but he can't seem to keep that level of concentration. But today he was fantastic. although he had a lot of shots to deal with. So to recap, well, the main issue for United today was our playing out from the back. So when De Gea's got the ball here, because Wolves built up in this 3-4-3, what we had was we got the back four with Luke Shaw and Wan-Bissaka not as high up the pitch as we've seen recently. And what that meant was we often got the ball wide to the fullbacks because that's where the extra man is versus the three. And when they got the ball into the midfield here, because Pogba and Fred were on the same line, it was really easy for Wolves just to cut off that press. The man cuts off that ball into Pogba, and Fred is also off the table. So Wan-Bissaka's only option is down the line, and that was normally blocked off by the wing-back. So the problem for United was that Pogba and Fred were constantly on the same line. What we needed was one of the two to push up 10 yards, because then Wan-Bissaka's got that ball into Fred, but he's also got Pogba. So if one of those options gets blocked off, the other one is still on. And the other thing that really helps with is that when they're on the same line, as soon as that ball goes into them, the Wolves midfielders, Neves and Moutinho, they can press. They know that there's no option forwards because they're covering it, and they know that the only option is sideways, and then the other one of that midfield pair is straight on to Fred. They know they've got that ball. And that was our biggest problem. Because we can't get the ball out of the pivot, then we can't sustain the ball, we can't sustain our attacks, and that makes it really, really easy for Wolves to just win that ball back, give it to Adama Traore, and counter when we're spread out, distances are big between us, and they can tear us apart. That was United's biggest problem. It's been a big problem under Ole for 3 seasons now. If we don't sort that out, we're going to really, really struggle this season. But if we do sort that out, hopefully Eric Ramsey and the new coaches can fix that, and then we can move forward from here. But it's time to put an end to this once and for all. It's been